Colonel Myers here again. I'm going to do a series of videos that I'm just going to call Rapier Thrusts, because these all come from Western swordsmanship, mostly the rapier. And so this includes the lunge, the pasada sotto, and the incortada. You find these not only in Western swordsmanship, they have been used with the knife. John Stiers, in his book Cold Steel, was laid down a system he was teaching to the Marines just after World War II. He included pasada sotto and incortada. If you look at the Spanish Navaja techniques, they included these as well. The pasada sotto was called pasada baja, and the incortada was called cordada. But they're there, so they've been part of use of a large blade in the West in many different ways, and there's no doubt at least some people back in the day used them with a Bowie knife. Okay, so before we start on this series, we'll cover the very basic idea, and I call it the pivot extension. The pivot extension becomes part of the way we do the lunge and some of the other techniques. First of all, let's revisit. If you go back and look at my prior video called on the triangle thrusting drill, you'll recall this triangle thrusting drill moved from here to here to here, here to here to here. And there was no footwork involved, because that is essentially the way you would thrust at a middle range, right? I'm already close with the guy, and then I reach up and I tag him. Or we're here, we've done something, I tag him, right? Boom. No footwork really needed from this middle range, or maybe I just take a single step and I tag him, right? The rapier thrusting we're going to be talking about is working from long range. It's from being way back here, and I have to close with the guy to land my strike. I'm not this close, okay? So it's a different way of thinking about it. Now, in the past, I also talked about timing a little bit. If you're a fan of George Silver, you'll know George Silver talked about true times and false times, and the time of the weapon, the time of the hand, the time of the foot. That can get way too complicated for our purposes. Again, just remember, the weapon leads the way. And the basic idea here, even when I'm this close, is I don't want to do this, right? I don't want to load up and then throw it, because that's too telegraphic. He can see that coming. The weapon leads the way. I want to shoot the weapon out first. It's almost like if I'm practicing, like somebody's got a hold of the tip of my blade and they're yanking it forward as I do my step, okay? That's an important concept to work on and realize. You always shoot the weapon out, shoot the blade out. The weapon leads the way as much as possible. Sometimes you'll just be almost simultaneous. What you don't want to do is that, okay? Which should be obvious. So, this first technique, this basic technique, I call it the pivot extension. Okay? You all realize in Western fencing, you throw the hand back a lot, right? Well, we do that, but a different version. I'm not going to throw my hand completely behind me. This hand, you notice how my elbow is bent at my normal guard position, and when I pivot, it comes back. My elbow, the angle at my elbow doesn't change. So it snaps back and snaps forward, like that. I'm not throwing it way back here, because then it's too slow to bring it back into action again, right? So this pivot, I got my rear heel up, I'm here, and I'm going to pivot on my rear, the ball of my rear foot, and as I do, I throw this hand back and open my chest, and that will shoot my blade forward, right? This is just like when you're in the gym, right, and you're doing flies like this. It's the same action, right? So from here, you'll notice there's this circular motion here. As this hand goes back, as I'm retracting my scapula is going towards the midline, it helps shoot my other scapula forward. It's like a circular motion. If you were able to look down on me from above, you'd see this momentum is going like this. It's a circular motion to really gives reach and power to that strike. So that extra reach is important. For instance, if I'm squared off with Bob and I'm not using any footwork, I'll thrust at his face so I can go past. You can see from here, I shoot the thrust, boom, that's my reach. It's as far as I can reach. Now what happens, watch what happens when I use this extension pivot. I just I just got at least 5 more inches of reach, right? Here's without, and here's with. Let's see how this goes back and snaps right back into place. Without, with. And notice I'm pivoting on this ball of this foot, and I've got all my weight on my lead leg. But I'm balanced. I'm not leaning forward. I'm in a nice, balanced position. And I'm back. Okay? And this is not just for thrusts. For instance, my snap cut. I'm standing here. I just can't really reach Bob with that snap cut. Then I put that extension onto it, boom, and I can nail him. Without, with. So that's the first step for these rapier thrusts, is this extension pivot. If I show it from square on, all I'm doing is shooting my blade out, pivoting on my rear foot. Moving around. Notice how fast I can bring this back, this check hand, back to center. I'm not doing this like this. Okay, now another thing to talk about that comes from Western fencing, Western rapier, is a tip cut. A tip cut comes from a thrust. Okay, so a tip cut goes out, and then let's say I didn't quite penetrate, didn't quite reach because Bob was moving back, then I could, boom, cut with the tip right up into his chin. That's a tip cut. So it's a thrust, then I snap with the tip. It could have gone outward, right? I could have thrusted and Bob moved, and then I do a tip cut out across his field of vision. But it's essentially, you achieve point, and then you move up, you move out, and you move down. So you're cutting with the tip. And that was important with a rapier. Again, this is not a rapier, it's a small sword. But they used them for more than thrusting. The rapier had a bit of an edge, especially at the tip, so that if you did a thrust and someone moved, you could still tip cut. These were often considered to be harassing cuts. Right? They're not going to do major damage, they don't have a lot of power, but if I've thrusted at someone, he's moved out of the way, and then I can do a fast tip cut across his biceps, that's going to factor into the fight. We've done something and he's moving out of the way, and I do a tip cut across his forehead, so now he's bleeding into his eyes and affecting his vision. That's going to make a difference. These tip cuts were harassing cuts used to kind of frustrate an opponent, to weaken an opponent, to take away his fight, essentially, right? Now, if you remember our figure 8 slashing video, we cut like that with the slashes too, because we're cutting with this much of the Bowie knife. We're not cutting back here. Remember, the weapon leads the way. I'm not cutting like this, where my hand leads. I slash like this, so that my point is leading. Still, even when I slash, those are still cutting with this part of the point. But a tip cut specifically comes off of a thrust at almost full extension, and it's a snap. It's a snap. Snap. A tip cut. So there's your extension pivot, tip cuts, and we'll go on from there with our series on rapier thrusting.